0 questions as the de facto Democratic nominee. And that is an amazing accomplishment in and of itself, that she's been able to go almost an entire month without answering a single adversarial question this entire time, because her campaign is 2 things: free money and joy. Those are the things: free money, joy, and 0 questions whatsoever. She now says that she will commit to 2 presidential debates. Now, normally you have 3 presidential debates, but she is very huffy about having 3 presidential debates. The last thing she wants is that her positions be exposed before the American public as the communism light that they are, economically speaking, and the absolute sheer weakness and cowardice of her foreign policy. She doesn't want that exposed on stage, so she's going to minimize this as much as humanly possible. Yesterday, Team Harris said that they would have 3 debates total. They'd have 1 VP debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. Makes sense, because the last thing they want is J.D. Vance just tearing Tim Walz a new one over and over and over. As we will see, Tim Walz is a horrible vice presidential pick. What they really don't want is a repeat performance of Kamala Harris in front of the public. See, it took many debate performances in 2019, 2020 for her to come completely apart, for the wheels to come off the Kamala Harris bus. And so what they're hoping is that the less you see of Kamala Harris, the more you will like her, which, frankly, is a good strategy, because the more you see of her, the more you dislike her. They put out a statement yesterday after Donald Trump had suggested that there'd be 3 presidential debates, just like normal, because the last candidate, died. So he has said, why don't we have 3 presidential debates? She said, no, won't do it. Quote, the debate about debates is over. I like that they can just declare this. They can just randomly declare that the debate about the debates is over. That doesn't have any sort of totalitarian overtones. Donald Trump's campaign accepted our proposal for 3 debates.
Totalitarian overtones. Kamala Stalin Harris only wanted to do 1 debate instead of 3.
2 presidential and a vice presidential debate. Assuming Donald Trump actually shows up on September 10th to debate Vice President Harris, Governor Walz will see J.D. Vance on October 1st, and the American people will have another opportunity to see the Vice President and Donald Trump on the debate stage. Now, what Democrats know is that they're going to ramp up the early voting as fast as humanly possible, and so by the time you hit October, half of their votes are already going to be in the can. Kamala Harris continues, voters deserve to see the candidates for the highest office in the land share their competing visions for the future. The more they play games, the more insecure and unserious Trump and Vance reveal themselves to be. To the American people, those games end now. I mean, the only campaign that's been playing games about the debates has been the Kamala Harris campaign, because Donald Trump made a commitment to Joe Biden, who is no longer the actual nominee. Kamala Harris wasn't involved in those particular negotiations, and then playing games to try and pretend that Trump is running away from them, when in reality they are running as fast as humanly possible away from Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, because they do not want to be in the public eye. And the reason they don't want to be in the public eye is because they've got nothing. They've got absolutely nothing. They just pasted a new face on the same old terrible Joe Biden agenda, and they are hoping that nobody notices that. Now, they do have a problem, and that is that the ghost of Joe Biden is now haunting Kamala Harris. What the Harris campaign would prefer is for Joe Biden to go back into the crypt where he is kept every night and just to stay there. That is what they would prefer. They would prefer that no one associate Kamala Harris with Joe Biden, which would be quite a feat, considering that Kamala Harris would be an obscure no-name California senator like Alex Padilla, if it were not for the fact that Joe Biden picked her up from the scrap heap of American politics and made her vice president on the basis of DEI qualifications. She is only famous because of Joe Biden. She's only a national figure because of Joe Biden. And by the way, from day one, he said this is the Biden-Harris White House. He said she was intimately involved in every decision. So she is tied at the hip to his policies, which is something that Joe Biden himself said. Peter Doocy asked him about it. And he said, she's not going to distance herself from my economic policies. By the way, he is right. The only economic policies she has are his.
How much does it bother you that Vice President...
This is one of the good things that the Kamala Harris campaign is doing, which is following along like the good parts of Biden's messaging and platform. Even the Republican Party is like increasingly drumming up populist economic messages. It is quite difficult for the likes of Ben Shapiro to openly advocate against policies like this. There are less and less people who take this like Redditor ass tone and go, no, neoliberalism is the way forward. Actually, when profits are good for corporations, like our lives are good too. Part of that is because the cost of living has greatly increased. You can't consistently advocate for like how a better future will only happen if the youth drop the notion that they're going to retire one day. You know what I mean? Like, that's a horrible way to fucking message.
Harris might soon, for political reasons, start to distance herself from your economic
She's not
plan?
going to.
You don't think she's going to? Mr. President.
He says she's not going to do it. He's very adamant. She's not going to do it. She's not going to do it. That's a problem for Kamala Harris because it turns out most people don't actually like her economic policies. In fact, recent polls showed 52% of Americans do not think America should move in the direction of California. And yet the same polls are showing that 52% of Americans are going to vote for Kamala Harris. What's the disconnect? She's hiding her policies. She's hiding herself.
Bro, you said nothing about her economic proposals. This level of disingenuous framing is so silly, dude. Come on. That's like a new low for Ben. I can't believe I'm saying this.
Instead, she's smearing it over with a pastiche of joy. A pastiche of joy. We'll get to the joy component in just a moment. Biden, however, will not let this thing go. Kamala Harris is trying to hide everything about herself. It's all masquerading as joy, but I'll tell you where economic joy truly lies. Not spending that much on your cell phone company. There's only one.
Fuck this guy.
Reporter said, yeah, Joe Biden was so concerned to let me know that he was connected with Kamala Harris that he grabbed my arm.
Bidenomics continue. Vice President Harris. It's no military assault. The economy is going to continue with all those reservation taxes working. In case you haven't noticed, it's working.
Yeah, he grabbed my arm in that answer. The president saying that the Vice President Kamala Harris will not distance herself from the current economic policies.
Now, the reality is that she is attempting to distance herself from Joe Biden while embracing even more communistic and socialistic policies. And she wants to have it both ways. She wants to both say that she was deeply embedded in Bidenomics and also she has no responsibility for Bidenomics. So yesterday, she had to do a very awkward rally with Joe Biden, and it was indeed an awkward rally. And Joe Biden was out there touting Bidenomics, which, of course, is wildly unpopular. But he was saying things that she can't dissociate with because she actually requires the same voters that Biden had in the bag. So here was Joe Biden rallying with Kamala Harris yesterday saying everyone does better with more unions. I mean, if that were true, then there would be more than 7% of the workforce currently unionized in the private.
Oh my God, I hate this monstrous piece of shit. Oh yeah, I saw this. Aiden Ross will be moving to Germany if Kamala Harris gets elected for president. Every state votes Democrat.
Private sector. It is eminently untrue. In fact, everyone does significantly worse with large-scale unions in the United States. Consumers get absolutely screwed. Industries turn into zombie industries subsidized by the federal government. This is the story of the car industry in the 1960s and 70s in the United States. But here is Joe Biden trying to make sure that he's got those union voters in the bag for Kamala Harris.
Why 7%? We're in America. Is it because of dipshits that pay your fucking salary have completely gutted labor unions? That's also part of the reason why there's no like mechanism of balance. It's completely out of whack.
There's more we can do for everyone. We can't give up. They told me every major piece of legislation we passed to give us the strongest economy in history and the strongest economy in the world. We got more to do for working people. And by the way, everybody does better when there's more unions.
That is eminently untrue. As any business person will tell you, that is not true. Sometimes unions are good. The vast majority of the time, unions make demands.
I like that he said, unions are bad. Source, Jeff Bezos. Unions are bad. Source, Bill Gates. He'll tell you how bad unions are.
Actually bankrupt the businesses they're supposed to be negotiating with. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris was campaigning with Joe Biden. And more of this, frankly. I think Republicans should be tying Kamala Harris to Joe Biden because, again, she is only famous. She is only a
I love this idiotic argument that unions actually bankrupt the businesses. So then what? Like unions are actually interested in like destroying the businesses? Who do you think the unions are comprised of, dumbass? It's the fucking workers. Obviously, they're not interested in bankrupting the fucking business that they are a part of because guess what? Then there's no fucking union.
political figure. She's only a Democratic nominee because she was put in power by Joe Biden, and she promptly turned around and stabbed him directly in the neck. Here she was at this rally bragging about her tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act. So she doesn't want to own the inflationary record of the Biden administration, but she brags about being one of the people who was the deciding factor in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which was one factor in the 40-year highs in inflation we have seen under this terrible administration.
No, he's right, dude. The Inflation Reduction Act, which came after record high inflation was responsible for the record high inflation that preceded it. It's still a problem and wants to do something about it. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What the fuck do you mean you want to do something about inflation? Hey, that's communism. And he keeps saying Kamala Harris has no policies, whereas like Donald Trump literally just keeps talking about inflation, and he says we're going to cut prices in half, and he has yet to answer for the how. How are you going to cut prices in half?
2 years ago, as vice president, I was proud to cast the tie-breaking vote that sent the bill that gave Medicare the power to negotiate and let it get to the president's desk. And I was proud when our president, Joe Biden, signed that bill into law.
God, she's awful. She is just plain awful. And now she's spelling out more of her communistic policies. So, as of today, she's going to call on Congress to pass a federal ban on price gouging as part of her economic platform, according to Politico, to lower grocery prices and everyday costs. That action, to be announced during a speech in North Carolina, is among others she will take in her first 100 days in office to lower high grocery costs, according to a campaign official granted anonymity to discuss policy ahead of an official announcement. And the fact that we are now 27 days in to her campaign and there is no policy on her website, none, zero, is pretty impressive, frankly speaking. This is idiot policy. Passing federal laws on price gouging on groceries is idiot policy. The reality is that in the grocery industry, profit margins are well under 2%. There's very, very little profit margin in the grocery industry because it's really competitive. There are tons of groceries. There's tons of supply. There is no shortage of food in the United States. And so the idea that it is monopolistic companies price gouging people and that's why the prices have gone up is insane. First of all, price gouging in general is almost always crap because the reality is that prices are determined by supply and demand. I can't gouge you on price unless I'm the only supplier available in a really, really wide radius. No competition is available. And you are willing to buy at the price that I set. That is the only way I can, quote unquote, price gouge you. But there is no actual definition for price gouging because it turns out that according to Democrats, price gouging is just prices they don't like.
Just because a grocery store has a different name and there's like 3 of them in a row in your neighborhood doesn't mean that they're not owned by the same company. Just so you guys understand. That's number one. Number two, grocery stores have increasingly merged with one another, and there's a massive merger in play right now as we speak. The last 2 major grocery stores have been trying to consolidate. Okay? So just understand that Ben is just straight up lying to you when he says there's a tremendous amount of competition in the grocery chain, in the grocery store business. Ben's also lying about the price, the profit margins that he's talking about as far as the grocery business being too hard to, I mean, they're just like, they're voluntarily offering, these incredibly low price points, even though it's just crazy. It's just it's such a hard industry. Why is he lying is the question? Because he's a right-wing bullshitter.
Look bad politically. If she believes that she's going to bring down prices through price controls, this has been tried. It is Soviet-style policy. It is Cuban-style policy. It is Venezuelan-style policy. Simply declaring that the price of a product shall be X does not guarantee the widespread availability of that product. In fact, what it leads to is a spur in demand and a reduction in supply. That is what price control.
Why, Ben? More people can buy food. They're going to eat. Okay. Why is that going to increase? Why is that going to decrease supply? Like, more people are purchasing. Why can't supply keep up with the amount of purchase? It always does. It always has. Why? We have so much surplus, dude. We literally dump a shit ton of food. We do not have a shortage of food. Ben already admitted that. He already acknowledged it. Not only did we already not have a shortage of food, we literally waste a shit ton. That is because we want to maintain the same prices for food. If we didn't dump all the fucking food that we're not consuming, then all of a sudden prices will get lower. And then companies would not want to, yield the same level of crop. What other people are not considering, or what Ben is not considering in this situation, is that there's subsidies all the way anyway. These companies are already completely subsidized by the fucking government. So we have subsidies that taxpayers are paying for to make the production of this food as cheap as possible. Then beyond those subsidies, we're also paying in subsidies in the form of like welfare to companies like Walmart and whatnot that take advantage of the social safety nets that kind of exist. They're not great by offering the lowest amount of fucking wages they physically can get away with. Then also, food stamps, EBT, obviously SNAP benefits that those very same workers utilize at the fucking store, mind you, double dipping into the fucking profits. And this dipshit is over here acting like there's nothing we can do. If these guys say, oh, sorry, we can't keep supplying you because price points are too low. Prices are too low for us. We just can't keep supplying the same level of food. Then you institute the Defense Production Act. And if they don't change their attitude, then you take it over, seize it.
Controls do. Price controls mean more people want the thing because now it's cheaper, and fewer people are willing to produce the thing because now there is no profit in producing the thing. Very often, there's actual loss in producing the thing, and people do not produce things at a loss. This is why price controls lead to bread lines. And I know Bernie Sanders thinks bread lines are great. Bread lines are wonderful because that means you're just in a line for bread. What could be but a bread line? Sounds great. But it's actual terrible policy. Every economist understands, right, left, center, unless you're like a full-scale Marxist, that price controls are some of the worst policy you could possibly implement, and obviously she's pushing it because she is of the opinion that Americans are too stupid to understand what price controls are. Now, Kamala Harris isn't stupid enough to believe in price controls, or maybe she is. One way is about Harris is, and you can't lower.
Dude, the funniest part about it is that he relies on how stupid his audience is to advocate for something that only benefits corporations, not even do a good enough job in his advocacy, because he knows his audience is so fucking dumb and they trust him that they won't realize that this is purely against the interests of his own audience, of the citizens.
Of something called the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928. In 1928, it's also called the Paris Accords at the time. In 1928, a bunch of countries in Europe got together, including Germany and the UK and France. They all got together and they outlawed war in 1928. And you know how it worked out? Not amazing if you know your history, because it turns out that the 1930s followed, and that included World War II, the bloodiest war in human history. It turns out you can't outlaw war simply by passing a diplomatic piece of paper saying we outlaw war. And you can't lower prices simply by saying that you wish prices to be lower and then setting price controls. In fact, you usually end up with precisely the reverse of what it is you are seeking. And Kamala Harris is not that stupid. She knows that. But according to Politico, of course, it's a political move, right? Elevated everyday costs have plagued the Biden-Harris administration since Americans' grocery bills spiked during the pandemic. Even with some promising recent polling, most major voter surveys show President Biden and Harris well behind former President Donald Trump on the economy. Harris has tried to level set with voters about the pain of high food costs in recent campaign speeches, something progressive and battleground district Democrats on Capitol Hill have said they wish Biden would have addressed.
Is Ben going to mention Trump's policies on how he's going to magically cut the price of groceries in half, as he has claimed he will do once he's president? So Trump, doing the drill baby drill attitude, is not going to magically lower oil prices when the American oil giants are not even remotely interested in lowering oil prices. As a matter of fact, they take advantage of OPEC Plus increasing oil prices by limiting supply.
In his presidency, Harris's proposals show how she would expand Biden's focus on price gouging and food costs, according to the plans detailed by her campaign. In addition to her push for the first ever federal ban on price gouging by food corporations, she would also direct the Federal Trade Commission and state attorneys general to investigate and levy penalties on food companies that violate the federal ban, which, again, is insane. This is
Why?
insane. Food is not more expensive because the bread companies decided randomly to raise the prices in collusion with one another. Food is more expensive because the Federal Reserve pumped money into the economy at a rate unprecedented in human history. And then the Biden-Harris administration decided to jack more money into.
Wait, who did that? He won't say it outright because he knows his audience is stupid as fuck.
In capitalism, we give to a certain group of people, by the way, a small minority, the power to determine prices. The prices to be charged for a shirt, for a bag of potato chips, for a software program, for whatever it is. The price is set by the owner or the board of directors, if it's a corporation, of capitalist enterprises. A free enterprise system means that the employer is free to set the prices that he or she wants. And what do they do with that freedom? Well, you know the answer, even if you've never gone to business school. You know that the employer, the producer, the owner, the entrepreneur, the capitalist sets the price that will get for him or her the greatest profit. That's what they're in business to get, and that's how they decide what to do with prices. Of course, they have to be careful. They can't just raise the price astronomically because obviously in our system, the higher the price, the fewer the people who can afford to buy it. And you'd be shooting yourself in the foot if you raised the price so far that there were only very few people left to pay, and then you'd lose in foregone sales.
I love the person being like, what about the invisible hand, when he's like quite literally describing that process of like what negative consequences can occur in terms of like normal market conditions when you set the price point too high. Like he's literally describing it. He's not talking about like everyone being motivated by self-interest and then that's the reason why there's like not a barter system, but instead of wage structure, blah, blah, blah. But like ultimately, he's talking about how, yes, unless there is like pure inelastic demand, barring the pure inelastic demand, when there are at least some level of when there's at least some level of competition in the marketplace, there are going to be certain factors in play that cause the people that make the prices to not go as high as they want to.
What you had hoped to gain by raising the price. So what every capitalist understands is you push that price as high as you can, just to that point where pushing it any higher would be bad for profits because of the number of people who couldn't buy it anymore, and that's when you stop. But notice in my story that the capitalist is setting the price based on one thing he or she is focused on: profits. It is not in our capitalist system the obligation or the responsibility of the employer to worry about the consequences of whatever prices he sets or she sets. And that's where they become like King George III, who set all kinds of prices. For example, the famous tax on tea that led those colonists in Boston to have that first Boston Tea Party, throwing the tea into the harbor in protest because what the king was doing by taxing the tea was good for the king, but was awful for the city of Boston's merchants and the people dependent on them. Well, when capitalists raise their prices, they are not responsible any more than George III was for what happened, for the suffering that I'm going to show you, for the social consequences I'm going to sketch for you when prices go up.
Yes. Adam Smith, by today's standards, would be considered a pussy-ass libtard socialist by Ben Shapiro, okay?